Hey guys, it's Mike here, and recently I was going back through my channel and having a discussion with a member of the channel on my Discord server, Bitter Than You, who had made a poll in regard to a question regarding Vegito versus Buhan. And it reminded me of something when I was talking about the fight on the server, which is I've never actually made a dedicated video discussing what the multiplier actually is for fusion, and really the different kinds of fusion in Dragon Ball Z, and I suppose Dragon Ball Super and the entire franchise as a whole, because I've referenced it many times over the years, going back to some of my early videos, but I figure considering the fact that I'm pretty much wrapping things up here on YouTube these days, kind of having a farewell tour in a sense with a lot of my videos and trying to put out all of the topics I always wanted to, it would make sense for me to finally do a dedicated one in terms of this. And so that's why I'm going to go in depth into the anime and even the manga, and really more the manga than the anime, because that's what I tend to do on here, especially for copyright reasons, and do that because for me, I don't necessarily align with a lot of different opinions about how fusion works in terms of especially the power, but I figure it makes sense to start out with the first fusion that we see in terms of the dance fusion, with that being Gotenks. And so let me show that right on the screen, because a lot of people have often used Gotenks as an example of a character who would get a gigantic boost from the fusion. And in one sense or another, that's certainly the case. He does go from being far more powerful than Goten Trunks individually, who are not as powerful as the main Super Saiyan, Super Saiyan 2s, and so on, to being able to fight against Fat Buu and eventually Super Buu. However, as I've talked about in videos in the past, a lot of people really underestimate the power of Goten Trunks, where they seem to think that they're like Frieza level on Namek, or weaker than Goku on Namek as a Super Saiyan, or a lot of other things like that. But really, when you get into the evidence, that isn't really true, because the fact that, of course, we have instances that prove that leading into this. For instance, the very first time we see Goten becoming a Super Saiyan on screen, which isn't the first time he did, but he did before, in the anime, we saw him fighting Chi-Chi and stuff. You could disregard some of the stuff we see there, like Goten Trunks fighting Popo and stuff like that, in the anime. Or you could just say that they're not going anywhere near his full power, or whatever have you. But fact of the matter is that when we see Goten actually fight against Gohan as a Super Saiyan, remember, this is mastered Super Saiyan Gohan, who is far more powerful than Semi-Perfect Cell and everybody like that. Up until this point, he might have gotten a little bit weaker, a little bit rustier, but nowhere near as weak as people make him out to be in this arc, even after, he's said to be weaker. And we see that Goten has him on the back foot pretty much the entire time. The only reason their fight even ends is because Goten pushes him up into the sky, and at the time, Goten is unable to fly. But of course, that's just Goten. Well, what about Trunks? Well, let's get into that too, as we go into the sparring between Trunks and Vegeta, the first time that Vegeta sees Trunks become a Super Saiyan. First time that we as the audience do as well, where we get the infamous, what is this, Super Saiyan bargain sale? Or in this version, the manga, for some reason, they don't have that. But either way, we do have the fight with the two of them. Well, not really a fight, but Vegeta challenges Trunks to land a single hit on him. Now remember, this is Vegeta, who is more powerful as a Super Saiyan than Gohan is at this point, who trained for 7 years, brutal training in gravity, and is far more powerful than perhaps Perfect Cell as just a Super Saiyan right now. And yet, Trunks in this case is able to land a blow on Vegeta's face, and you can see Vegeta is actually trying. He's sweating, he's putting an effort to dodge, he's surprised when Trunks comes at him. You can see the exclamation lines. This is all visual cues to explain to you that Trunks is not actually weak. Vegeta gets mad when he gets hit and instinctively punches Trunks in the face, and doesn't immediately kill him. Obviously, he wasn't punching him at full power, but still, this is enough to indicate that Trunks and Goten are way more powerful than Frieza and Namek, than the Super Saiyans at the start of the Cell Saga, the Cell games, a lot of the characters there, perhaps, way more powerful than people make them out. And then the two of them go on to train up until the time of the tournament where they fight each other. And then they, in fact, fuse together. Now, before the two of them fuse together, we see even more remarks about their power. For instance, when we see Goku is training them on screen. All these little thumbnails are hard for me to see. We see that Goku goes to train them in how to do the fusion dance. Let's see if I can actually find that one because it's so small. Okay, here we go. So when the two of them power up to their maximums, we see Piccolo's reaction. Piccolo is often used in this arc to gauge the strength of other characters by his reaction or by what he says. He's the exposition dump character in this arc especially, and often serve that role. Just seeing Goten and Trunks going full power at this point after training with Gohan and Vegeta respectively before that little tournament, Piccolo is shocked by how strong the two of them are. Okay, and they only get stronger from here, especially when they merge together as Gotenks. When the two of them do that, we're told, first off, visually, how incredibly powerful they are with the torrent of energy, like a storm of ki that Master Roshi says. And at that point, everyone's saying how incredible they are, and we're told that, they are obviously going to be able to be way stronger than they were before. But with that being said, in their base form, they don't stand a chance against Buu. Obviously, they didn't know at the time that Gotenks could, fuse into a Super Saiyan or transform into a Super Saiyan after fusing together, like we see here when he does for the first time. Piccolo mentions how huge his power is, but at the same time, again, the only reason he doesn't stand a chance of defeating Buu right now is because the fact that he hasn't really trained in this form yet. He hasn't really done anything. So it's clear that his power is very significantly larger. And we had more evidence given to us by Goku earlier when he's explained to Piccolo what he had said before, where when he had fought Buu as a Super Saiyan 3, he tells Piccolo that he had informed Buu, which he doesn't actually do on screen, but we're told he did. So I don't know. I guess that we could just say that happened when we weren't looking real quick. It was one of the lines of dialogue that Toriyama just didn't show us for some reason. And so either way, he says that someone stronger than him will come and appear and fight him in 2 days. Goku here, based upon what he saw from the Metamor people in the afterlife where he learned the fusion, he did not learn the fusion on Yardrat. He learned it in the afterlife when he was dead. He believes and extrapolates that this Gotenks right here, the Super Saiyan Gotenks, will be stronger than Goku as a Super Saiyan 3. So that's a huge leap, but again, what exactly is that leap? Well, many people have come up with different numbers over time. They believe that the fusion multiplier could be thousands, millions of times, or, 1 times another, which I'll get even more into when it comes to the power of, Vegito. So in this case, I don't think that it needs to be that high, to be honest, because realistically, I had just explained the Royal We, that Goten and Trunks are already really powerful even before fusing together into a fusion. Their base form is then shocking everyone as well. But, what is the power of the base form? From what I've seen, all of the evidence in my theory suggests that when it comes to Metamori's fusion, the dance fusion, it is the power of the two characters that fuse together at their maximums going into the base form of the next form, the fusion. So that would mean that, for instance, Goten as a Super Saiyan plus Torankasu as a Super Saiyan, and then they combine that, and that is their new base form. Now, perhaps you can argue that that is actually throwing in maybe a little bit of a boost on top of that too. But it doesn't need to be many, many, many times greater in order to elicit the exact same responses or give somebody the exact same level of power in their base form, and thus the Super Saiyan forms on top of that. Remember, Super Saiyan has a large multiplier, assuming it still exists at this point in the story, and that's a whole other can of worms, to the base form. 50 times, depending upon, what you believe, if it increased or decreased over time with your own particular theory. And so the power of two Super Saiyans combined together into a new base form and then multiplying that by 50 times is going to be, of course, way more powerful than all the Super Saiyan 2s, or even Super Saiyan 3 Goku at the time. Because even if we say, for instance, that Goten or Trunks was half as strong or even a quarter as strong as Goku as a Super Saiyan, or in his base form, comparatively. And then we say that they combine their powers, so that would make them half or equal to in terms of, their just base forms at the time. And then, they go Super Saiyan. Well, then they would be equivalent to Goku as a Super Saiyan in the base form of Gotenks, or as a Super Saiyan 2, or so on and so forth. And then you multiply that by 50 times, so of course it's going to be stronger than Super Saiyan 3, which is 8 times stronger than Super Saiyan based upon the super exciting guides, if you take those multipliers of credibility. Super Saiyan 3 could also be something more like Super Saiyan 4 and GT, where it just brings out your full power to its maximum. And as we see with fusions, they seem to have greater potential. So I think that all that lines up with the power that we see from Gotenks, for instance, or even Gogeta later on in the story in Fusion Reborn, for instance, where he fights against Janemba. And we see that his power against Janemba is greater than the power of the individual Super Saiyan 3 Goku and Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta at the time, obviously. Way more, in fact, because he's a Super Saiyan on top of that, he could stomp Janemba. Well, he would be, Goku plus Vegeta would be 1.25 times stronger than, Goku as a Super Saiyan 3, because Vegeta as a Super Saiyan 2 would be a quarter of the strength of Goku. And then you multiply that by 50 times. So of course, they would stomp a character who is, maybe a few to 10 times or something stronger than Gogeta. We never see Janemba go full power until he fights Gogeta, but it's irrelevant. It's kind of like what we see with Vegito in the next fight I'm going to show in the anime and manga. Now, again, I think that it's based upon the multiplier, in this case, of the strongest forms at the time. So even though, for instance, we see Goten Trunks fuse together in their base form, the fusion isn't going to, not account for what power they can output realistically. It's not going to just suddenly be like, oh, so it's two base Saiyans combining, which means that it's just going to be multiplying the two base Saiyan powers. It's kind of like that with, Potara later on and everything like that as well. A lot of people seem to believe that the power of the two, when they evenly match, that is the power that is amplified. And maybe you can make the argument that it is because it's magic. It doesn't have to rely on the actual power on hand in the bodies. But I think that that's just a way of the two flowing into each other and combining into the new form. And then it has access to all of the maximum power that that character would have had, plus the other one, and then multiplying it by other forms on top of it, which is what makes it really OP in general compared to somebody just powering up and transforming themselves, And thus, as a result, I think that makes sense. Then we can go even further with this with regard to, what we see in Dragon Ball Super, if you want to include that continuity. For instance, we see when Gogeta is fighting against Broly later on, what do we see? Gogeta, in his base form, performs better than Goku and Vegeta when they are at their highest forms in that movie. I mean, in the Tournament to Power, they have higher forms than that, as well as the arcs in the manga, which for some reason it just seems to completely ignore. No Blue Evolution Vegeta, no Kaioken times 20 Super Saiyan Blue Goku, but base Gogeta outperforms both of them at their highest forms individually. And when he goes Super Saiyan, way more than that, Super Saiyan Blue, way more than that, it doesn't mean that the fusion is stronger than the fusion of Super Saiyan God or Super Saiyan Blue or anything individually as a normal multiplier that's always the exact same thing. I broke this down when I talked about in a video on my channel, which is Super Saiyan God actually stronger than Fusion in Battle of Gods, or whatever that title was? I don't know at this point. It's not like that. It's just that it factors in the highest form of the characters at the time. So Super Saiyan 3 Goku and Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta, for instance, if they were to do the fusion in Fusion Reborn or in the Buu Saga with Gogeta. Of course, because the fact that Koyama decided to invent, Gogeta in the movie Fusion Reborn, Goku and Vegeta did not get to do the Metamores fusion dance, which Toriyama originally intended. I did a video on my channel talk about, was Gogeta actually supposed to defeat Buu at the end instead, or fight him at least, instead of Vegito, and you could check that on my channel too. A million videos I've done over the years, really more like a little over 1,000, but still. And so he had to invent a different form of fusion. And what exactly is that? Well, we have the Potara Fusion introduced right here, when Goku is going to go off and fight against Buhan. Buhan. And so what happens? Well, we are told that neither Goku or Gohan, if they both teamed up together, would stand a chance against Buu Tanks at this point. So what happens is that the old Kai gives him the earrings, which are the treasure of the Kais, and they're the one that allows them to combine together and become even stronger, and so on and so forth. Now, we're told that the Potara is even better than the other fusion, but we're never really told why or how. A lot of people assume the multiplier must be much bigger. A lot of people assume that, it could be because of it being permanent, supposedly, until Super creates its own version as to why that's the case, and then Daima does this as well. And so we don't really know. It's never elaborated on in the anime or the manga why it really is better, or if the multiplication really is better. And I'll get into some of the statements and stuff that people always bring up anyway. But either way, we're told that if Goku and Gohan were to fuse, they wouldn't need to become a Super Saiyan necessarily in order to defeat Buu Tanks, which makes perfect sense. Because think about it. Buu Tanks, the power of him, is shown to be more of addition than these particular fusions. For instance, we see that when he fuses with somebody, his own form of fusion, the merging, the combining, the absorption, whatever, it is told that to us pretty explicitly right here that he is adding the power of these characters to himself. He's adding Gotenks' power as Super Saiyan 3 to him, and Piccolo's brains. And I'm sure whatever 1/1,000,000th of increase they'll give him with Piccolo at this point compared to everybody else anyway, especially in the Buu Saga, where some people think Piccolo is weaker than the base Saiyans, and Toriyama did not give him any shine in this arc at all for some reason. So yeah, Gohan individually was stronger than Gotenks and Super Buu. And Super Buu is a lot more powerful, as we were also told earlier, than Fat Buu when he goes to show up on the Lookout, where he had perfectly reorganized his body in order to be able to utilize all of his power and his pure rage in his output. And then we're even told when he shows up on the Lookout and Piccolo tells Krillin to move him into the time chamber, Goten and Trunks, so they could train, that they actually need to, because they would not stand any chance against this new power of Super Buu. I bring all this up because the fact is that Goku already said that Gotenks would be stronger than him before he even knew that Gotenks would train the time chamber, become Super Saiyan 3 and all that stuff. And Gohan is stronger. So obviously if the fusion is like 1 times another, like Gohan would have to be so much more insanely powerful in order to surpass a fusion, right? So that's even more evidence, I feel like, that suggests it isn't like that gigantic of a magnitude of power of an increase. But either way, the fact is that we see that Buu absorbs both of them, and then so it would make sense if Goku plus Gohan would be maybe, you know, adding a little bit extra of a multiplier in there, like I said before, like, I don't know, a 2 times or something like that on top of it, would be able to defeat this Buu tanks before, well, even going into a Super Saiyan. If Ultimate Vegito, I don't know, Super Dokkan Battle would even need, or even be able to become one anyway, because he'd be Ultimate. But either way, getting into that next part, we do see that, well, Buuhan also absorbs Gohan into himself as well when Goku goes to show up and merge with him at the end of this, becoming the strongest Buu ever. And he would presumably remember that he was Kid Buu at one point, so Kid Buu fans BTFO. But either way, yeah, at that point, we do see what happens. Vegito is born because Goku and Vegeta merge together in order to fight against, well, Buuhan. So at this point again, we get to the question of, well, what is the power of this particular fusion? What is the multiplier? Is Vegito and the Potara a greater multiplier? Now, at this point, a lot of people bring up the idea that, well, Buu actually says that no matter how strong you two become, when you merge together, you'll never be as powerful as me and all this other stuff. And they take that super literally, and they think that that means that inherently the fusion Potara must be greater than the fusion dance through its multiplier and so on. Now, that never happens in the manga, like, at all. So it's probably based upon statements that we get in the anime, which I'll get into shortly. All he says in the manga is, oh, another strong guy appeared. The two of you together don't scare me, which has nothing to do with fusion. He didn't know they were going to fuse until he goes to fight him right here. Now, in the anime, there is a couple statements that are somewhat similar. For instance, when the two of them fuse together, he just says, I don't think that just the two of you combined together are a match for me. But at this point, it isn't just, he's not talking about a fusion multiplier. For some reason, Buu seems to be talking about, like, if the two of them were added together instead of a it's weird. It's like one of the things that we seem to see throughout the course of this fight is the fact that Buu, for whatever reason, is like not aware of certain things that realistically he should be if he was merged together and got all of the information from everybody he actually, well, combined with in terms of the absorption. Like, he's like, oh, so it actually does seem that you're stronger than when it was just the two of you, which is like, obviously, yeah, that's how fusion works, Boo. It's not just 1 + 1, right? And so he, even now, when it's the base form of Vegito, still doesn't think that he should be as powerful as Buu. Now, here's where a big thing comes into play in terms of the difference between the anime and manga, because in the manga, there is no fight between Vegito in his base and Buu. Immediately, he goes on to become Super Vegito, or in the Viz manga, for some reason, Super Vegerot, Super Vegetail. It's one of those weird Vizisms that the manga happens to have. Fortunately, I have a fan translation, which is not always correct, but I don't care. Either way, the fact is that the most of it will be. It's more literal. And so we get Super Vegito, and, well, he immediately is going Super Saiyan, or there's lightning here. Doesn't that mean he's Super Saiyan 2, according to every single fan who tells me that Gohan is never a Super Saiyan 2 when he fights against Bora and the Buu Saga in general, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so he's Super Saiyan, asterisk, and he goes to fight against Buuhan, and he beats him down. We see a lot of similar things actually happen in the anime. Like, for instance, Buu throws a blast at him when he's in his base in the anime, and he knocks it back at him, and he dodges by, sucking his head into his sternum like he's a turtle or something. Is he not turtly enough for a turtle club? And beating him up and stuff like that. And a lot of the stuff that we often see in the anime actually was in his Super Saiyan /2 in the manga. And so he's beating him, he's doing really well, and it's interesting. So similar statements are actually also said in the anime and manga about Boo's power. So this is something I actually noticed more of when I went back and rewatched it right before doing this video when I was taking these screen caps, where when he goes and becomes Super Vegito, he's still pointing out multiple times when he's fighting in his base and when he's fighting in his Super Saiyan, that Boo isn't actually going full power. Even when he's beating him up and throwing away Boo's blast and everything like that, when he's base Vegito and Boo is, fighting him and Vegito seems to be better, while Boo still isn't actually going full power. And this is something that we get more demonstrated in the anime, as a matter of fact, because Vegito is like insulting and he's styling on him. He's telling him, oh, well, maybe you actually have been going full power, in which case I apologize because I didn't realize that you were, you weren't holding back and you're just weak compared to me. But, there are other things like this where it's kind of like, why does Vegito have to explain to Boo simple things like how to use key sensing and tracking and not relying on his eyes and stuff? These are all little moments that lead to the idea that Vegito, or Buhan in this case, is actually not as reliable of a narrator or somebody when it comes to credibility in terms of how many of these powers really work, and especially with regard to the multiplier for fusion, which is why I think a lot of people who read far too much into this statement about, oh, you would never be a match for me by combining, it's kind of disproven. It's just typical bluster from a typical Dragon Ball Z villain who just gets a typical beat down afterward, because that's what always happens. And so, so in the anime, this is proven even more so that Boo was not going full power up until after Vegito is a Super Saiyan /2, because we see when he starts to rage out and truly tap into his power with the dimensional scream moment, where he actually knocks Vegito back, as we see right here, and he starts to destroy the universe by breaking down the barriers, which will cause the other dimensions to crush and destroy the actual universe itself. And so Vegito starts to confirm this, as we could see right here, that Buhan is, in fact, stronger than he was letting on, even when he was fighting against Super Saiyan Vegito. He might not have as much capability of controlling it unless he gets enraged, but we see Vegito goes to stop him when he sees what's happening, and he can't right away. Actually, he has to put in a considerable amount of power and energy to be able to stop Boo when he's in this enraged state. And so this goes and shows that even in the anime version, where people seem to think that Vegito is so much more powerful than the manga version because he just fights in his base form, that actually isn't the case, and that he did in fact need to become a Super Saiyan to defeat Buhan and to actually try hard during moments like this, or else he would not have been able to do it. Now, again, if that's the case, then that completely destroys the idea in both variations that many fans have that fusion of the Potara is a massively bigger multiplier than the fusion dance, for instance, and not just that it is one character multiplying their power by the other characters, as opposed to addition and then a little multiplication on top of it, or just addition for the base form and then multiplying that base form, like I mentioned with Potara, with the dance fusion. For instance, because the fact is that when Buhan is fighting against Goku and Vegeta, fused together as Vegito, well, he isn't Buhan plus Gotenks anymore. He is instead the fusion of, the combination of Gohan as Ultimate Gohan with Boo, who has the power of Goten, Trunks, and Piccolo individually. So there would never be any reason for them to have to fuse together and then multiply the power on top of that with Super Saiyan in order to win against this character. They would utterly annihilate him easily in just their base form if it actually was Goku and Vegeta together, multiplied together. You see what I'm saying? Because the thing is, Goku and Vegeta's base forms, let's lowball to the most ridiculous extreme. If Goku and Vegeta's base forms were multiplied together, without even using Super Saiyan at all, then they would still be, as a base form fusion, like a million times stronger than Gohan and Boo and everybody else like that, because of how insane the numbers would be. Like, that would be millions or whatever times, if whatever you think the power levels are at this point. Like, even if you do the lower levels and you say Goku and Vegeta have like a 60 million power level each, in their base forms at this point in the story, and you multiply 60 million times 60 million, you see what I'm saying here? Obviously, they would annihilate everybody with ease in just the base form of Vegeta or Gogeta at that point in time. So that goes to show that it doesn't make any sense what the guide suggests, that Vegito, or the Potara Fusion, is Goku times Vegeta, because that would be such an astronomically impossible number that they would never lose to anybody ever. Like, Beerus would lose even compared to all the ridiculous retconning nonsense in the story, right? But they can't even beat Beerus in Battle of Gods based upon what Goku extrapolates his power to. Even the movie version, where Super Saiyan God is like, I forget exactly, a 6 or 7 comparative to Beerus's 10. And then, of course, Whis is a 15, like Toriyama initially said, which is obviously not the case for the show and the manga and stuff like that. And so even Resurrection F, and then, depending upon what everything else factors into the continuity, it wouldn't make any sense. So that's why I don't believe that the Potara Fusion in the anime or the manga is that high of a multiplier. In fact, I don't think there's anything to indicate that it is a different multiplier than Dance Fusion, than the fusion for characters like Gogeta or Gotenks. As a matter of fact, over time, we've gotten different things that have said, well, Gogeta is stronger than Vegito, or Vegito is stronger than Gogeta. And then eventually when Broly came out, it's like, oh, they're actually equal. And I think that that's actually more realistic. I think the main reason why the old Kai is telling Goku that the Metamorphosis fusion is not the same level of power or capability or whatever have you as the Dance Fusion is because of the fact that it's supposed to be permanent, and also because it's of a higher divine order. But, it's the Supreme Kais at this point in the story. Like, their divine order has constantly been surpassed by like mortals. Like, we could say the Metamor characters and Goku and friends, they stomp all the Supreme Kais with the exception of like the Southern Supreme Jacked Kai and the the fat one and stuff like that. So again, I don't really see anything in universe that ever really shows us that Potara and Metamorphosis fusion have a different multiplier. I don't really think that there's enough evidence to support that they do. And if they do, it's got to be minuscule, because even the anime version, as I just showed you, Buhan does not even go full power and really try and go all out until Vegito is, well, Super Saiyan and beating him down. He is either not capable of tapping into the full power of Boo plus Gohan plus Goten and Trunks and Piccolo or whatever have you, but either way, he doesn't, even in this version where we always hear about how even base Vegito's clapping him, it isn't the case. And so that's the thing. It's like, I don't think that there really is much to support that there's anything different. Now, with that being said, in terms of the normal fusion, I think that's pretty much how it works for Gogeta, Vegito, the fusion, the Metamorphosis, and the dance, in terms of basically the highest powers of the characters at the time. So Goku as a Super Saiyan 3, let's say, Vegeta as a Super Saiyan 2 combine their power, and then that's their new base form, maybe times 2, maybe times a smaller number, but it wouldn't be a giant number, or else again, they would be able to, even the manga, beat Buhan, without much difficulty, without ever transforming, much like they would have been able to as Gohan plus Super Saiyan 3 Goku beating, Boo Tanks potentially, because it wasn't that gigantic of a difference depending upon how you scale the characters relative. I mean, I did a whole video, I don't know, like 10 years ago or something now at this point, about how strong Gotenks actually is. And with that being said, though, I do want to talk more about the power of, well, the failed fusions, because that's something nobody ever talks about, right? Because I do want to get into that. This video is already comprehensive as it is. We're already over a half an hour because I can't do a video like this without going forever. So what about the failed fusions? Well, are we told that there's really much of a difference in the power between these ones when they fail, but they still fuse? Like, for instance, their poses are slightly different right here, where Goten has the fists, Trunks has the fingers. Don't take that out of context, and they turn together into fat tanks, fat Go tanks. And yeah, so everybody's saying, this is weird. Maybe it's because he's so fat, then he'll be able to fight a fatso with another fatso, and blah, blah, blah. And he starts to run. They're all like, oh, wow. But then he's like gasping for air. So then we get to the next one, which is the old one. And it's kind of interesting how they parallel. You know, we have the fat Boo, we have the thin gray wrath Boo, you know, the gray, whatever you want to call him. I mean, I have a whole video about why Boo turned into Kid Boo instead of him that you can check out on my channel. And yeah, neither one is being implied to have like a giant amount of power or like really that much of a difference, you know. So it's only when we get to this correct version of the fusion that they do. And so we get this point here where it's clear to everybody with the reaction, with Master Roshi mentioning the power of Gotenks on display, just how strong this fusion is. But do these get any stronger, or are they weaker than the individual components? Is this fat Gotenks weaker than Goten or Trunks? I mean, we see in like Dragon Ball Superhero, this fat Gotenks with the teen Gotenks is able to crack the head of Cell Max, you know, if you want to include that in the continuity. I know it's decades removed and different writers and for the most part and so on, but, you know, like a lot of people try to include that. So would Goten and Trunks be able to do that individually? I don't necessarily think so. You could count as a gag moment or a Toon Force moment or whatever, like a Rayleigh or somebody like that. Popeye turning him into a stuffed animal or something. But, you know, I definitely think that if there's any increase in their power, it would be significantly lessened by comparison. And not just that, but also it would, you know, be incapable of being brought out because, like, he has zero stamina because he's fat here, as we see. Or he is so old that he just can't do it. It's like, you know, an old person who is like on the verge of death, basically trying to, I don't know, bench what they did in their prime, right? So kind of like that overall. They inherently are held back by the weaker fusions, and the same thing with Veku or the fat Gogeta that we see in Fusion Reborn, and you know, the failed ones that we see in the Broly movie. And yeah, I don't think that it would be much of an increase. I think another thing worth noting before I go with this whole statement too is the fact that it could be another thing that is a possibility for it being superior to the other forms of fusion because of the fact that, well, Potara eliminates the issue of having to equalize the power of the two people fusing together. Now, we see this, for instance, with when the other characters that fuse Potara before Goku, with Kibito and Shin, Kibito Kai, Kibito Shin, whatever you want to call them, when they come together before that. Because, obviously, Supreme Kai is way more powerful than Kibito. We see the two of them just immediately merge together. Goku and Vegeta might be equal in their base, but again, at their max power, it's not even close. And so right here, we see the same thing happening. The two of them merge together. They have way more power, but as Supreme Kai, the Elder, says, oh, well, you weren't that much to begin with, so you shouldn't even stay here. But realistically, if it was one times the other, Kibito Shin would destroy Super Saiyan 3 Goku, Gotenks, Ultimate Gohan, Buhan, everybody like that, because, I mean, Supreme Kai, as we saw, with all the different feats, and I've discussed in my own videos explaining how strong he was, has to be somewhere comparable to even like regular Perfect Cell in the characters from the Cell games back then. So that would, you know, multiply that by the power of Kibito, who, even if he had like, I don't know, 10,000 power level, which obviously has way more because Gohan didn't think he could beat him in his base form, that says that he would be stronger than, obviously, everybody in the Buu saga if it was one times the other, but it isn't. So that, again, I think goes to show that it might be combining the two together and then maybe throwing in another multiplier on top of that, but not significant at all. Then we, of course, have things like Namekian Fusion. That's up in the air how strong it really makes somebody. We see that Piccolo goes from being marvelously strong, according to what Nail says, to being able to fight second form Frieza. And, of course, when Piccolo and Kami merge together, they're stronger than the Super Saiyans and Semi-Perfect Cell and equal to Android 17, and so on and so forth like that. We have the absorption, if you want to count as a fusion of Cell of the androids, which I've gone into. I don't really think that was necessarily a plus in that case, because the fact that we saw just how much Cell's body reconfigured itself kind of like Super Buu and became that much more significant. You could say the same thing. Like, I don't think it was just like, the power of Wrath and Fat Buu combined and that was Super Buu. It was more like a reconfiguring, reusing all of the power within him, limiting the power of the Kais that were holding him back and making him weaker, and so on. And so when it comes to what is the multiplier for fusion, Potara and Metamoran, I think it's simply a matter of characters maximum plus characters maximum becomes the new base form of the fusion character, with perhaps another minor boost on top of that of a 2 times, you could say 5 times, 10 times. I know people love their number inflation, the Dragon Ball fandom, 10 trillion times, beyond infinity times, so that, you guys don't get really mad because I say it's 2 times or something like that, Whatever way, doesn't matter, because the fact is that the new power of that character then gets multiplied by other multipliers on top of that, and it's far more than strong enough to take care of whatever character they need to, unless the plot says otherwise, which it always does for Vegito and Gotenks and almost every other fusion, except for Gogeta, except for in Dragon Ball GT. But let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments, and that being said, Fusion! Ha!
Y'all, and you better subscribe.